Welcome to the C.S. Joseph Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Taylor, also known as Raka, bringing you another Acolyte question today. Today's question is, how well developed is a person based on their type? Now, unfortunately, this question is kind of a contradiction in and of itself. But we'll try to tackle kind of the core of what this person is trying to understand or solve based on the question. But first, why is this question a contradiction? Why is this not a simple, cut and dry answer? Oh, you look for this, this, and this person is this well developed. So to start, we need to understand that there are two principal concepts going on when it comes to humanity as a whole, and especially in regards to the science. And that is nature and nurture. So what are we talking about when we talk about human nature in the context of this system? We are talking about a specific type with a specific function stack in a specific order, right? So in ENFP, top to bottom, NE, FI, TE, SI, NI, FE, TI, and SE. So that function stack, top to bottom, 1 through 8, not just the top 4, 1 through 8, is the natural function stack, the nature. What this nature is, what this function stack is how we are going about perceiving the world. Each of these functions has an optimistic and pessimistic charge associated with them, as well as a overall cognitive attitude based on the slot that they're in, aka the numbered slot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. These two concepts, these two things, are going to determine what kind of preference that we utilize these functions with when taking information in from the world. There's sending and receiving. Right, we have an episode on the channel, Chase calls it the Mr. Radio head episode, where we talk about the sending and receiving, the kind of frequency that we operate these functions in. This is all nature, okay? So when we say ENFP, we're talking about that full function stack, the attitudes associated with those functions, the order they're in, the attitude tied to them, whether they're optimistic or pessimistic. How we take in the world. Now, that's nature. On top of that, we have axis, orbit, and reflection, which are also nature. Axis, orbit, reflection are also tied to the numbered slots. For example, the first function with the fourth function is in an axis with each other, the hero and the inferior, right? The nomenclature of hero, parent, child, inferior, that's nature. It's the attitude, regardless of what function is in that slot, that is the attitude associated with that function. Hero is optimistic, parent is pessimistic, so it goes optimistic to pessimistic, pessimistic, all the way down the stack. Now with orbit, it's the first function and the fifth function. With reflection, it's the first function with the eighth function. And all of these functions are interrelated to some degree. Again, this is all nature. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have nurture. So what is nurture? Well, as you know, there's a relation with just the first function, hero function, for example. The hero function is directly related to the inferior, the nemesis, and the demon, directly through axis, orbit, reflection. So if something comes in to the hero function, or comes out of the hero function, there's two other functions, right, that can react. There's more than this, by the way. For example, the parent being the gateway function to the hero, but I digress. Trying to keep this as condensed as possible. But what's the decision? Let's just look. Let's exclude the demon function for just a moment and keep it as simple as possible. All right? When the hero function is impacted in some way, you have both the inferior and the nemesis that can also be influenced, or you can go from the hero into one of these two immediately after. Well, how do you decide? How does the brain decide whether to go? Because what we're talking about with the inferior and the nemesis is, of course, the gateway functions to the unconscious and the subconscious. And this is the perfect crux to the issue inherent in the question. What ends up happening is, depending on a person's life experience, what they've gone through, how much success they've had, when their hero function's been impacted and they've either decided to go from the hero to the nemesis or the hero to the inferior, those choices are going to have feedback and a consequence or a result of that interaction. And based on whether it was positive or negative, and you keep having this happen over time, the brain starts to develop a preference for one side of the mind or the other based on environment, based on nurture. And suddenly this nature-based system of input, process, output, feedback is now having preferences or priorities. And so what this ends up being is what we end up seeing, right, is what is called development over time, this preference for a side of the mind. And so when we start to look at, and we take all these things, okay, and that was just the first fork in the road, right, of development. It's, I have a preference. I can't choose both at the same time. I'm going to choose one or the other. And so which one the person ends up choosing it sets the course for what they're going down, what path they're going down, whether they're subconscious focused or developed, right? Because focus comes first, then development over time. But we're so young when we end up with our first development that we never really see the first actual focus. But I digress. Again, trying not to go off on too many tangents here for this video, because it's really kind of a can of worms of a question. But let's say, okay, we know that there's focus and development here and here. Okay, we know that the person can choose either subconscious or unconscious at first. So let's shift the question now. How well developed is this shadow focused person based on their octagram now is what we're talking about. Based on their nurture, how well developed are they? That's still kind of a difficult question to answer. Now, we can look at a few different things from this point. It's a starting point, right? So you can look at if they're shadow developed. Now you can look at, okay, well, when they go to their shadow, when they go there and they transition into their shadow functions, how accepted is the nemesis's input to the hero? Is the critic function being wise or hypocritical? And so you can start looking at these aspects, and it gets a lot more nuanced from here. There's a few seasons, if you're trying to have a better understanding of what development is, there's a few seasons that are must watches. One of them is season 2. And that is nature, but it is going to give you a better understanding of what that nature means. And then you have season 19, which is cognitive development. And then obviously the octagram seasons, a couple of them are season 34, season 35. Season 35 being octagram variance. Season 34 being what is octagram. I really recommend that you go and watch these videos to have a better understanding so you can better understand when you're trying to understand what development actually means. I think that when we talk about how well developed a person is, it kind of has that same thematic nuance to it that when somebody asks, oh, is this type healthy or unhealthy? And my gripes with the healthy, unhealthy metric is that very often, we are talking about our own personal standards for a certain type's behavior. And if we're talking about general human behavior, if we're talking about mental issues and mental disorders, which I have my own gripes with, of course, it gets to be even murkier, because then we're looking at these mental issues. What are they the result of trauma? Are they a misunderstanding of a specific type? Because there are certain issues that are type specific, and when you end up having certain stimuli in childhood coupled with a certain nature, you end up seeing more prevalence for certain issues. That's way outside the scope of this video in particular, but maybe we can look into that in the future and talk about that in the future and have that conversation. But I just want to give the context that it's not so cut and dry to say how well developed is a person. Even if you like take it to the appropriate lane, which is development, which is nurture instead of nature, which is as a type, it's still a murky concept that we are developing more and more and coming out with more and more content regarding it, but is not the kind of question or the kind of thing that can be answered so simply in, a short video. Anyway, that was a whole lot of information. If you guys have any questions, leave them down below. I'll try to address more specified questions in the comments if you guys have them. If you want to just chat or give your input on this information, again, feel free to leave it below in the comments. I do appreciate this question. It's just, unfortunately, it's kind of contradictory, and I am thankful that we had the chance to actually address it, because it is a question that I kind of see the same semblance of fairly often, where people just want a simple, how do I know I'm on the right track? How do I know another person is on the right track? It's just, unfortunately, humans aren't quite that simple. So anyway, leave a like, leave a comment, join us on the Discord. You guys have a wonderful rest of your night.